Hi there! Valentine's is right around the corner, so today we're making an adorable gnome couple in cold porcelain clay. I'll show you everything step by step, and we'll even add it to our perpetual calendar that we made last week. I hope you like this project. Let's get started! Just to begin, we're going to need 1 tablespoon of cold porcelain clay for each, so that'll be 2 total. We're just going to knead that thoroughly, making sure it's very smooth, no cracks, no smudges or anything. And remember, you can find our cold porcelain clay recipe here on the channel. I'm going to leave a link in a card on the top right and also in the description box below. Now I just made that into a circle and I'm slowly making it more narrow so it's more like a drop. Like a little teardrop or raindrop. Just like that. And now I'm going to start making it flat at the bottom. We're doing something similar like we did on the gnome that we shared in December. Except we're not going to have that cone as a base, so everything's happening with our clay. Now this is where we start shaping the hat. So I'm just adding some twists and turns, some character in there. And then just bending it a little bit more. And in the end, if you notice the intro here, they're gonna form a heart with both the tops of their hats. So I'm just trying to start shaping that starting now so it's easier when it gets to that point. And I'm just doing the same thing with the other one. But before I start actually getting into the shapes, I'm measuring it. This one is 10 centimeters. And that's just so I can get the ends of the hats to match. In this case, it doesn't matter which side you turn it to, since in the end you'll be able to put them together. But if you do have a preferred side of the clay after you modeled it, then do try to keep that in mind when choosing which way to have the hat tips go. So I'm just trying to keep them relatively even, not identical, just enough to still get that heart shape very clearly when I put them side by side. And now I'm going back in with this tool just to add those little folds on the hat, just very lightly, very subtle. If you don't have that bone tool, you can also just use a toothpick, a skewer, a crochet needle, a coffee straw, basically anything that's round will work. And just being very cautious that they don't lose their shape. Now we're going to start by making him. So I'm just getting 1/8 of a teaspoon of white clay. Remember, this is dyed white clay, not natural clay. I just shaped that into a circle, then into a sort of drop. Now I'm making it more flat here. Just like that. And now I'm just adding some lines. Sort of like the hair strand, since this is going to be the beard. Just like that. And I'm going to place it here on the bottom section of our little gnome shape thing. And now for the nose, I'm also going to measure 1/8 of a teaspoon. But this one I'm going to cut it into 3 pieces. And from these 3 pieces, I'm only going to use 2. I just shape them into a ball, then make them more like an oval. Then I'm going to lower you'll see me here. I'm using a bone tool to lower the beard a little bit to make space for that nose. And I just added a little bit of glue and put everything in place. Now I'm going to make the outside border of the hat. But before we move on to that part, I'm going to make the arms. So for the arms, I'm going to measure again 1/8 of a teaspoon of red clay. Cut that, well, stretch that out into a cylinder. Cut it in half. And then we're going to follow the same procedure we follow for all other arms and hands and bodies. And you can see me working here, just getting the hands from that leftover skin color clay of our choice. And there we go. We're just using a round hand here. If you want to add more detail, you can do that as well. I have other videos showing how to make hands for our dolls, which would work just as well here if you want to have more detail. I'm just adding a little bit of glue to place the arms on each side. And this will be, again, completely up to you if you want to have the arms in a specific direction or anything. I'm going to keep this one to the side, so in the end they're going to look like they're holding hands. So now we can actually move on to the outer border of the hat. And for that, I'm measuring 1/2 a teaspoon of clay. Again, in that same red color I'm using for the entire piece. Kneading that thoroughly, stretch it out, sort of like we're going to make a cylinder. And we just have to be careful in measuring to make sure it can go all the way around our little figurine. I'm not going to add glue yet, and specifically because the clay is still fresh, it doesn't really need glue. And I'm just wrapping it all around that figurine, all around that hat, and connecting it at the bottom on the back part of our figure. And then just cutting it together so the seams blend nicely together and they're not visible. And there we go. Now we have the basic structure for our gnome. It's very easy. And these are great for keychains and then just adding as little charms to anything else. And now I'm just going in with some eyeshadows to give some shading all around the piece. Now I'm going to get some brown eyeshadow. Of course, this is just toner. You can get powdered toners. And I'm going to go in with that brown color and add some color to the hat, the folds and everything, making sure I don't get it on the skin or his beard. And then using a lighter shade of brown, I'm going in over the beard. And there we go. Now our little gnome is ready. And I just want to make some minor adjustments just to get it from every angle, making sure the beard looks nice. And now I'm going to start working on her. So for her, I'm going to measure again 1/8 of a teaspoon of the skin color clay of your choice to make the nose and the hands, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of red clay for the arms, just like we did for him. And same procedure, making it that sort of cone shape, making sure we're kneading it thoroughly so we don't get any cracks. And then make sure they're both roughly the same size, just like that. Now for the face, I'm going to cut this other piece into 4 pieces, just like that. And I'm only going to use one of these 4 pieces. I'm making it flat and then into an oval, just like that. And I'm going to put them side by side just to get a general idea of where this should go. In this case, this is her face. I said nose earlier, but this is her face. And here I have a crochet needle, and I have a coffee straw at the top. And I just have that with a slanted cut to get that shape and let me make the mouth, that semicircle there. And I'm just getting the eyeshadows again, just to add a little bit of color here, highlight the mouth and the cheeks. Now I'm getting another one of those 4 pieces I had earlier, kneading that thoroughly, forming it into a ball, then more of a cylinder, an oval. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of glue right above the mouth, and that's where this nose is gonna go. Just like that. Once that's all set, I'm gonna add 2 small holes at the top here that are gonna be the eyes. You can just paint them on, or in my case, I'm just using 2 small pieces of black clay and then just placing them in that space right there. And again, just adding a little bit of shading to the nose. And so everything looks good together here. I'm going to add a scarf. For that, I'm measuring 1/8 of a teaspoon in white. Of course, you can choose whatever color you prefer. And I'm wrapping it underneath the face or the nose. And then all the way to the back, placing both pieces together at the back, but making sure it's very thin, since the hat is also going to be over this area and I don't want it to look too bulky, because it's just going to waste clay. Just like that. And I'm just using this other tool to add some texture and design all around that scarf, so it's very noticeable that it is a scarf. And that's what it looks like now. And once it's done, I'm going to go in and paint. So this is just acrylic paint, and I'm adding some red lines very lightly all through the scarf. And to keep it from looking a little too Christmassy, I'm adding more detail and making some tiny hearts in her scarf. So she's dressed for the season. And just to make those tiny hearts, we make this sort of like V, just with 2 simple lines. And then just very small, given the space. But that shape should make it very evident that they are little hearts. Just like that. Now, since it's the same color I use to dye the clay, I'm just going over the back of the gnome with the paint here, so I'm not going to be able to see those little smudges I made with the white clay earlier. You can also use water for that. That is just a very quick fix. Now I'm attaching the hands to the arms. And these were too big, so I'm just making them a little bit smaller. Placing them in the arms or the sleeve. One on each sleeve. And then for this, I'm going to have to lift that scarf just a little bit, so they are right underneath it. You know, just following those layers, making sure everything looks good. And remembering that one of these hands is going to have to be facing to the side instead of downwards, since they're going to be holding hands. And now for her, I'm also making braids. So for that, I measured 1/4 of a teaspoon of cold porcelain clay in white. I'm cutting that in half, then in half again. And from one of these 4 pieces, I'm gonna cut it in half again and use one of those halves, shaped it into a circle, and then place this sort of oval on both sides of her face without attaching it to the scarf. So keeping it raised. And I'm just adding a little bit of texture, making those hair strands. Just like that. And now I'm just needing the remaining pieces I had set aside when I make those cuts. Stretch it out and then cut it into 4 again. And I'm cutting these 4 pieces in half again. So I have 8 total now. And from these 8 pieces, I'm going to stretch out each one of them, making these long strings, then putting them together and twisting them like we're making some kind of rope. And we're going to do the same thing for the other one. I'm just going to measure them so they're roughly the same size. Now 2 are going to be twisted in the same direction, and the other piece is going to be twisted in the so the opposite direction. You'll see it here, I twisted that one upwards and this one downwards. Because that way, when I place them side by side, they are going to like get us that braid look we're going for. Just like this one. I wouldn't have to worry about like braiding separate strings. It's going to give that look and it just works. And we're going to do the same thing for the other braid. Now once we have both braids ready, I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to those white pieces we added earlier. This one is just for support and to make sure the hair looks a little bit fuller. And I'm just adding a little bit more texture in between those little strands we had earlier. And I'm making some cuts so the braids are shorter and they're not gonna hit the bottom surface that I placed them on. And again, just adding some texture and making sure they're both even. Now I have it looking like this. I do leave a little bit of excess so they kind of turn upwards, but that is up to your own personal preference. And I'm just going to measure 1/8 of a teaspoon in red clay again. And I'm going to cut this into 8 pieces. And one of these pieces, I'm going to cut it in half again. Now I shape that into a drop and then more of like a triangle shape. You'll see it. I'm slightly out of frame here, but you'll see it soon. Just like that. These little triangle thingies. And then I'm just making a line down the center of the top side to make these tiny clay hearts. Now I just put them together and that creates a little bow. And I'm going to place them at the bottom of her braids. Now I just made another one and added it to the other side. And now using white acrylic paint, I'm going to make the same thing I made for the scarf and then just add tiny hearts all over her sort of sweater. And in any spaces left, I'm just adding some little dots. Just like that. And I'm also going to do that on the sleeves. Just so everything looks nice and cohesive. I'm also going to add some to the top part of her hat. Just like that. And I'm also going to add some to his hat. And now they're all set. Now I'm just making sure they're still matching with that heart. Just checking on that every couple of times after making an adjustment. Now I'm just measuring another 1/2 teaspoon of red clay. Shape that into a ball, stretch it out into a cylinder. Just like we did for his hat, we're making that bottom border of her hat. And making sure it can wrap all the way around, and we can meet both pieces at the back to get that seamless look in the end. And I'm just adding enough glue around the braids and the face to make sure it's very well secured. I want the eyes to be barely visible, so she has that same look that he has, where the hat is covering most of the face. And I'm just, again, making sure that I get a seamless connection at the back there. This one is very exact, so I'm not going to cut off any excess. There's no excess to cut off. But I can get the same look just by modeling it and smoothing it out. And that's all set. Now we have our little gnome couple here. And again, these are very easy and very fun to make. So the next step is just to go in and add some shading. I'm just getting this light brown again, adding some color in over the braids just to make that braid design stand out. And I'm not going to add any to the scarf itself, just to make sure you can differentiate her hair from her scarf, given that they're both white. And again, I'm posing mine like they're holding hands, and you can glue them together, but I personally don't, because my daughter likes to play with them like they're interactive pieces. So I keep them separate so she can just move them around. But you can definitely glue them together. So in my case, I'm just trying to focus and making sure I keep those hands, their arms at the right angle to make sure the tops of the hats meet, but also that their hands are together. Now I have some roses that I made here as well, and some leaves that I want to use to decorate around them. Now each rose is made using 1/8 teaspoon of clay. And I'm going to share real quick how I make them. So I'm just stretching this out into a cylinder and cut it into 6 equal pieces. And for each piece, I'm just making it round, then fully flat, like a flat circle. And then you can see me here like wrapping them around like little spirals. And we're just doing the same thing for all of them and wrapping them around each other. So right when one petal ends, I'm attaching the next one and wrapping all around until I meet the other side of that petal. Now for the fourth one, same thing. Looking for where the other petal ends. But in this case, since we're starting to shape that rose, I start opening it up. And again, just making sure I attach it to where that one ended, wrapping it around, and then just opening it up. And same thing for the last one. placing it right where the other one ended, and making sure I can wrap all the way around to the other side. And there we go. Now we have a rose. Now, if you'd rather have both ends free when you're doing this, you can also just make all of these 6 pieces flat ahead of time, stretch all 6 of them, and then you just have the pieces and then pick and attach, pick and attach. You don't have to like make them flat with one hand. It's just whatever's easier for you. Now for this part that we have at the bottom, these little like leaf, the base of our rose, that's in green. I'm just getting a small piece of green clay. And this would be something like cutting a 1/8 of a teaspoon into 8 pieces if you need a reference. But it's just a very small piece, and I'm just stretching that out into very thin strings. And instead of cutting them, I pull them apart so we get these little pointy edges. It's pointy ends. And I'll just layer them into a sort of star and add the rose right on top of it with a little bit of glue. And then just lift it all around, and now we have our entire rose ready. Now for the leaves, same thing. I'm going to add 8 pieces out of 1/8 of a teaspoon of clay. Shape each piece into a ball, then making this sort of half moon or drop. And making sure it's pointy on both sides, and then using any tool that's flat here like a very dull knife, just going in and adding the texture on our leaf. And then just for that extra touch, I go in with my eyeshadows and add some shading all around to make the texture on the leaf stand out. I'm using a darker shade on one side and a lighter shade on the other side just to get the better look. And then last but not least, I'm going in with some brown eyeshadow to make those lines stand out even more. Now before adding the flowers, I'm going to measure 1/8 of a teaspoon in red again, and then cutting it into 4 pieces. And I'm going to make a heart here. And again, I'm slightly off frame, but it's the same procedure, making a drop, then making it flat. So you have this little rounded triangle, and then you add one line down the center to make it a heart. And I just put that heart in his hand. He literally carries his heart on his sleeve. And then just to make sure we can keep that heart at the top, you notice I just wrapped this little napkin around. Just going to be soft enough or gentle enough to make sure it doesn't make a dent. And it's going to make sure they dry in place. Again, the easiest way is just to glue them together, but I don't want to glue them together simply because my daughter likes to keep them movable. And then it's completely up to you where you want to add these little roses, and even if you want to add these little roses. I just really like adding flowers into pieces. Just like that. And now I'm just going to go in and add the leaves. And I'm going to add some shading to these once they're all in place. Just like that. Now I'm also going to do the same thing for him. You can also just add one large rose instead of 3 smaller ones. And now to get this part here to stand out, I'm going to get the white acrylic paint again. Now this one is spiraled, so it has a very nice shine to it. And I'm just going to go over those hearts we made to make them nice and shiny. And I'm going to add some more smaller ones. And again, it's very easy when you're just making little V's. And I'm just trying to make them as small as I can. And filling in the gaps with little dots. You can use a toothpick for this or even a small bowl tool. Just anything that works for you. Now, if you also want to add this all around his hat, you can definitely do that as well. And now I'm adding a little shine to the heart. And then adding a little bit more of an outline. But not a full outline, just separate lines. Just like that. And again, now we're just going to shade those little leaves and the flowers. Now for the roses, I'm using a dark brown in the center just to give them that depth. And make them stand out. And then just using that same brown shading on the leaves to make the little texture stand out. And adding dark and light green to each side just to get a better color effect. And I did the same thing for all of them. Now once we have all of that done, it's going to look like this. And again, just trying to make sure they dry in place. And I added a very subtle line around the border of their hats just to make it stand out a little bit more. Completely optional. Now using this white pearled powder toner, I'm also adding a little bit all around the roses. Just to make them stand out even more from the hat and everything else since everything is red. So just a little bit of a shine or sheen to make them stand out. Now once we're done, we can place them on top of anything we want, but I'm placing these on my perpetual calendar here and making sure the heart stays in place. I mean, it won't stay right now because I keep moving it, but if you let them dry there, they should stay in place. So now our little perpetual calendar has an extra decoration that we can set around for each season. So I hope you liked it. And now for a bonus. So as a bonus, I'm making a base for them so they can look even better on their own without needing to be added to something. So I have this 3.5 by 6.5 centimeter little cardboard rectangle. And I'm also going to need these little wooden sticks. And I'm going to cut them in half and then make them look like little picket fences. I use scissors for this. You can use an X-Acto knife or just whatever is easier for you, but you notice these are very soft, so scissors work just fine. And we're going to need 4 of these pointy ones. I'm going to leave one of them intact and then just cutting those round edges. And we're going to need another 3 that I do have to measure because they're slightly bigger. Now these 3 are 7 centimeters long. And I'm gonna cut another one of these sticks, this popsicle sticks, in half. And I'm gonna get just 2 random small pieces. And I'm getting the measurements here. These are 4 centimeters and the other ones are as big as the popsicle stick itself. And starting with our cardboard base, I'm gonna wrap it in green clay. Remember, this is gold porcelain clay. This should work for other clays as well, but you might need to make some adjustments. So now I'm just adding a little bit of glue here. And adding enough glue all around the edges, the other side, and stretching out the clay so I can wrap it completely. Just like that. I'm adding enough pressure all around the cardboard piece so I can cut it together and that will form the seal. That way it's seamless and we won't see any cardboard at all. And then just remember to be very careful that everything did get well covered and that we don't pull on the clay since it's still very fresh. Now once we're done, I'm going in with a toothpick just to add a little bit of texture to make it look like grass. You can also use a pin for this or any tool that's specifically for this. I just like to use whatever we have at home, preferably. And then just being very careful not to go all the way through and let the cardboard show through. So just doing that very lightly. Now I'm going to do that all around, but I'm going to place them on top first just to have a reference on where I do need to add the grass and what space needs to stay flat so they can fit nicely in there. Just like that, and I'm just again going in all over that cardboard piece. Well, now it's a base piece, it's no longer just cardboard, and just adding texture. And again, going in and add some shading using that light green color on one side and that darker shade on the other side. And then very slowly blending them together. And I'm adding a little bit of orange. Just trying to get a very nice grass or lawn look. And doing that all around this piece. Now once we're all set, it's going to look like this. Now on the sides here, I'm not going to add any texture since this piece is going to fit exactly into the perpetual calendar, and if I add texture, it's just not going to work. If you're making this to have something separate, then you won't need to worry about that. Now I'm setting that base aside and I'm going to start putting together the rest of the pieces. So on the back here, I'm adding plenty of glue. And remember, this is the same glue I use for the cold porcelain clay recipe. And again, making sure that that piece is nice and secure against the rest, against the clay itself, not just the glue. And now I'm adding those picket fence pieces, starting with the ones on the outer sides, the outer edge. And now adding the other two in that space between the center one and the ones on the outside. And that's going to look like this. Remember just to add enough pressure to make sure they stay in place without affecting the shape of our base. Now at the top of these little picket fence pieces, I'm going to add that straight one we cut out earlier. That's half of a popsicle stick. So adding one at the top and another one at the bottom, very close to the base, but with enough space underneath it. And I'm going to set this aside and let it dry for a bit. Ideally, again, you should wait for this to dry. But I was getting a bit excited, just wanted to show you real quick. And once you let that dry for a bit, it's going to look like that. And now these three pieces that I also have are for the sign. So I'm just gluing them together, adding one single line of glue on each side, roughly 1 centimeter away from the edge. And just to make them even more sturdy, I'm going to use a small piece of clay, roughly half of 1/8 of a teaspoon, so 1/16. Stretching that out, making them flat, and they should not be wider than those sticks we have at the top there. So trying to keep them narrow. And adding them on top of the glue, and this is just an extra way to secure these boards together. And doing the same thing for the other piece of glue. And now adding some more glue. And now we can add these little board pieces. And now it's going to be very sturdy. Now I'm getting another small piece of clay. Trying to make sure our little support boards at the back are even. And that piece of clay I got earlier, I'm going to do the same thing, just stretch it out, make it a little bit longer, so they're a little bit longer and a little bit wider, so they fit nicely in here. And I'm going to place it again on that little sign to make sure it's centered. I'm just adding some more glue and then securing both pieces together. And now we have our little sign. Well, our sign and our picket fence. So now you can definitely leave this as is. In my case, I'm going to paint it white. And I'm just using white acrylic paint for this. But I'm painting it very lightly. Sort of like dry brushing. Because I want it to look more like vintage or worn out. Like it's definitely been in nature. And doing the same thing for the entire little fence. And once we're done, it's going to look like this. Now for the message, I'm going to add a heart in the center to get our little design started. And if you notice, this heart is also just a thicker V. That's all we're doing. And just making it a little bit pointier at the bottom. And now I'm going to use brown paint to make the message, but before that, I'm going to go in on my sign and just add, again, that little worn out look using these dry or chalk pastels. I'm just going all around here, making sure it gets into the space between each board. And I'm going to do the same thing for the picket fence. Now I'm going back to my message. Of course, you can write it first and then paint over it. Well, write it first in pencil and then paint over it. Or you can write directly. So this, you can adapt it to however you prefer to work. I usually just freehand it, but it's easier, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like if you just write it out first or sketch it out. And now just using my liner brush and some brown paint, going over my guidelines. And remember, you don't need to make it identical to what you wrote before. It's mostly a reference to make sure everything's centered. And now in the center here, I'm going to make sort of like an arrow. I'm getting black acrylic paint and adding a line on the left side of the heart, then another one on the right side in that same direction. Just like that. And now we start adding those little details that are going to turn this into an arrow. Just like that. Now, in that heart in the center, we're going to complete the phrase. Now remember that our heart will have to be, well, the heart we drew, not our heart, it will need to be dry by now. The paint needs to be fully dry. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a little pink combination. And I'm just adding that little is inside the heart and completing the lower part of the phrase. Now once we're done, it's going to look like this. And if you don't want to place it on the calendar, you can definitely just place it anywhere, just keeping them both together here. And they work nicely as a small gift or anywhere in your home. I have mine on my desk right now. And remembering just to make sure they dry thoroughly. And we can also add more decorations if you want. But if you notice, this looks like it's enough. It's very nice and simple. We could even add a flower to the top, but that's just not my preference, but it's completely up to you. And if you want to decorate our calendar that we made before, it fits nicely right into it. And now we can have them decorating during February or any other special month. And well, again, I just hope you like this project. My name is Rossy Rivera. Thank you for watching. Many blessings.